You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. Zev Brenner. It's always a privilege, always a treat to have former Ambassador for the United States to Israel, David Friedman. He's now a book author as well. It's called Sledgehammer. So, Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Zev. Great to be with you.
And good to see you at the Chabad of the Five Towns dinner the other night as well.
There was.
So I understand the book is off to a great start. 10,000 copies in the first week. That's amazing for a book about Israel, right?
Yeah, from what I'm told by the publisher, they did some research. No book on Israel has sold more copies in its first week in the past 10 years. So yeah, we're off to a great start, and I hope more people read the book because it's an important story. I hope people read it.
No, it is important. So now here you are. You were a lawyer working for Donald Trump. He becomes president of the United States, and then you get to be the ambassador. So I just want to go back a little bit. First of all, how did you meet and start working for Donald Trump?
I was introduced to Donald Trump by a good friend named Howard Lorber. He's now the head of Douglas Elliman. I think it's the largest real estate brokerage in the country. And he introduced me when Donald was having some issues with his Atlantic City casinos, and I met him, and he hired me, and that's how I met him. That was about 20 years ago. It was a long time ago. And then from time to time, not often, but from time to time, I would represent him. And as I say in the book, I had real success representing him in ways that I myself probably wouldn't have predicted. We had tough cases, and we were able to prevail in all of them. At the time, I just chalked it up to good outcomes. Looking back on it, I think maybe there was something more to it. Maybe God was helping me gain some credibility with somebody who 20 years later would be in a position to change the world.
But he liked the fact that you outsmarted him. I think you're right about a deal where you made $5 million. He didn't want to pay you that amount of money, but you got it anyway. How did that come about?
Well, look, it was all kind of tongue in cheek, but he doesn't like to pay retail for anything. I mean, he likes to get his money's worth, and he likes to get bargains, and he likes that with lawyers as well. He was hoping to get a discount from me. Now, I thought got him an excellent result in a difficult case, and I managed to kind of get paid around him. He didn't realize that I had gotten paid already when he asked me for a discount, and I told him it's too late. The money's already changed hands, and he took it very well. He laughed it off and said, you're a smart guy. God bless you. Keep the money. You did a great job. So I told the story mostly, I think, just to kind of humanize the relationship that I had with him.
Well, you also mentioned, which I thought was very interesting, is that when your father, who was a prominent rabbi, Rabbi Morris Friedman, he had Ronald Reagan at his shul, and that was a big event. And when he passed away, the last day of Shiva was a snowstorm. Even people who lived close by didn't come, but yet Donald Trump spent hours coming out to you, correct?
Yeah, he arrived in the afternoon. It took him 4 hours to get from Manhattan to Woodmere, and there was no one there, so he had the chance to really speak for a while. And I got to know him well. Then I was obviously in a vulnerable, state, because I just lost my father, and we talked about my father. We talked about his father. We talked about, the things that motivate us. I found that he, had very, even though he's sort of even then he was sort of a larger than life character, but I found that, one-on-one, he had, very admirable, qualities in terms of how he felt about his family.
So what is your secret you're able to last so long? Because as you mentioned, he can go through people. He can say you're fired, like he did on The Apprentice. What's the key to your success, to your longevity in your relationship with him?
Well, look, I've always been loyal to him, especially, once he became the president. He's the commander in chief. He was elected by the American people, and I was always loyal to him. I had an incremental respect, obviously, to the office of the president, which he held. I was always straight with him. I always told him what I thought was I gave him what I thought was my best advice. I didn't tell him what he wanted to hear. And I think that, there was a level of mutual respect that that we had for each other, we continue to have for each other, and there's real longevity there, and I'm not sure exactly what causes it, but compared to others, but I've certainly always given him my best advice and worked as hard as I could for him.
How did he take it when you disagree with him? I think you did after the last election, right? You disagreed with the fact that he said he shouldn't harp on it.
Look, I really felt that the election was the election. I mean, you can relitigate this election. People will probably be writing books about the 2020 election for the next 10 years, and the facts will go where they go. People are still looking at it. What I told him is that you had 4 years in office, which, if you just look at what you accomplished, you look at the results, 4 years of peace, 4 years of prosperity. Even with COVID, you set the stage for vaccines and therapies that without which we can only imagine where we'd be today. So I said, you have an incredible record to run on, both domestically and abroad. And why don't you focus, on all that you've done? I think you've done more in 4 years than most presidents have done in 8. And that was my advice to him, and it continues to be my advice to him, because I'm proud of what he accomplished and what we accomplished. He's committed to getting to what he considers to be the ultimate truth of that election, and he wants to get through it. He feels very much aggrieved by the way he was treated, beginning even before he was elected. You're following now all the stuff that's coming out of the special counsel's investigation about the Russian hoax and how it was inflicted upon him. So he feels aggrieved.
Hillary Clinton, right? How she was involved.
Yeah. So look, he feels aggrieved by it. He wants to get the facts out. I don't blame him. I mean, I don't think any president in history has come into office with the amount of headwinds he's had, the amount of challenges he's had from all the mainstream media. And that's how he feels. And look, it's easy for me to give him advice, but I wasn't the one who was, being accused of being a traitor from the day I got into office. I mean, he was. And so I understand how he feels. And
did he ever share that frustration with you?
Oh, all the time. Absolutely. I mean, he always felt that he never got a fair shake from 95% of the media. And it and of course now he's watching in the Biden administration, where there's you could fill 24 hours a day of news stories about the failings of the Biden administration, about issues with Hunter, issues with the president's health. I mean, there's a lot to say, but no one wants to say it. And so that's also frustrating to him.
I find some of the things are ludicrous, that he stuffed flush papers down the toilets. It just doesn't even make any sense, but yet it gets reported in the media. I'm sure stuff like that must set him off.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, I never heard that until I saw it on TV. I have no idea what they're talking about. Nobody, I mean, if anybody wants to do away with a piece of paper, I highly doubt anybody would use the toilet. I mean, it's there. You can burn it, you can put it through a shredder, which is what most people do. It just doesn't sound plausible. But again, I heard it for the first time like 2 weeks ago.
Are you still in touch with former President Trump?
Yeah, I was with him I went to visit him about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I drove. I'm in Bal Harbor near Miami, so I drove up to Mar-a-Lago to see him. I had a one-on-one with him for about an hour. We had a good conversation, talked about a lot of things. And
did he promise if he runs again that you'd be the ambassador to Israel again?
We didn't discuss it, but I can tell you that if he does run again and he's successful, I would love to be the ambassador. And if any of our other friends decide to run and become president, and they become president, I feel the same way. I'd love to get back into that job. I felt like there were still things left to be done.
And did he give you any indication if he's going to run?
No, I mean, he's very careful about that. There are a lot of legal ramifications from announcing that you're a candidate, and he's not going to do that until at least after the midterms.
We're speaking with former American Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. His new book is called Sledgehammer. So here you are, you're a lawyer working for Donald Trump. He becomes president of the United States. So how do you go from corporate lawyer to becoming ambassador?
So it's it's an interesting transition. I had to learn the ropes of being a diplomat. It's not. I mean, there's nothing about it which isn't intuitive. I mean, if your goal is to have fostered good relationships between America and another country. So you learn everything there is to learn about the country. I had the benefit of many decades being immersed in issues relating to Israel and Israeli politics and Israeli history. So I had that advantage. I was fluent in Hebrew. I had that advantage. The way the State Department works is something you have to learn, and then you also have to learn how much of the State Department's idiosyncrasies and structure you're prepared to accept. Because at the end of the day, I viewed my job as being the president's personal representative in Israel. Not, while I might be technically employed by the State Department, I had a state.gov email address. But ultimately, my job is to represent the president, not anybody else. And so,
and that came into play many times. We'll get that in just a moment.
Yeah, it came into play. Sure.
My question was, how did the president think to get you? Because you were a lawyer, you weren't involved in diplomacy. How did he think that you would make a good ambassador to Israel?
Well, look, we knew each other a long time. He knew that I had a significant command of the subject matter. We had talked about Israel a lot. He knew how much Israel meant to me. He knew that I had, I think, real negotiating skills, diplomatic skills, good on my feet, good before a camera, hopefully. Hopefully we'll see that's true today. I think the total package from his perspective was the right one for the job.
Now, you mentioned the State Department. They're known, they have bureaucrats, are also known for being anti-Israel. Did you come across that?
Well, what I found was a kind of a wooden insistence on doing things the way they've always done things. Now, when it comes to Israel, it's not, overt anti-Semitism or overtly being anti-Israel, but it's treating Israel as almost as a problem within the region, a problem to be solved, rather than an opportunity to be exploited. So, here, the United States and Israel have this extraordinary relationship on so many different levels, including mostly, I think, importantly, intelligence and military cooperation and technology sharing. And it's the only democracy in the Middle East, and Israel's got eyes on threats that affect the United States that, frankly, it sees before anyone else does. And so there's all this great opportunity between the U.S. and Israel, and somehow the State Department views that as a challenge that needs to be managed. And the way I looked at it was, this is an opportunity, and we should strengthen this relationship as much as we can, because it's the best way to advance the interests of America. So that was sort of the philosophical difference. And then, there was, as I point out in the book, the Secretary of State really kind of was not interested in seeing me play the role that I played, which was primarily guiding the U.S.-Israel relationship. And so there was a lot of friction. He didn't return my phone calls. He was very much against moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. And of course, in a State Department, it's run by the Secretary of State, so most people are going to naturally follow his views. So it was.
Didn't Secretary of State Tillerson try to thwart the move even after it was announced? Didn't he try to stall it, that it would take many years before it actually happened?
Yeah, after the president decided to move the embassy, he then put out a memo that was many pages long with many questions and many subparts about all the potential issues that could come up with physically moving the embassy. And it was clear just by looking at that what he was driving to was kind of slow rolling this process so that there would never be an embassy in Jerusalem, even if we were lucky enough to serve 2 terms. And seeing that, I knew we had to kind of cut through it. And that's why I went to the president and asked him, when do you want to move? When do you want to do this? And he said, as soon as possible. And so we bypassed that entire State Department process in favor of a very accelerated move of the embassy, which took about 4 months.
Didn't he tell you to tell Secretary of State Tillerson that you're in charge?
He told me to tell him I'm in charge. And I said to the president, maybe you'll tell him, you're the president. And he said, I'm very busy. I got a lot of things to do. Tell the secretary that you're in charge on this issue, and that, and that you'll be handling it from here on in. And I did. And I think, I can imagine, I wasn't there when he got the email, but I think I was told the reaction was pretty negative. But at the end of the day, the president is the executive in charge of foreign policy, and it's his decision. And ultimately, that's it. When the president decides something like this, people have to march in line. And so from that moment on, I worked day and night for about 3 months. We had the spectacular opening of the embassy on May 14th, 2018.
That's what the sledgehammer name comes about, right? Because you use a sledgehammer to on that day.
Well, no, actually, literally, the sledgehammer actually was used. It literally was used a year later when we opened up the city of David. There was a big underground excavation at the city of David, which ceremonially I was given a sledgehammer to break through a makeshift, plaster wall, and that opening up the city of David to American diplomats was considered so controversial that the New York Times referred to me from that moment on as a sledgehammer. They said a metaphor was born. So I used that metaphor and turned it around for the title of the book.
I want to get back. You had obstacles because you had to deal with Tillerson. He wasn't the only one that opposed what you were doing with Israel. You were changing policy in the United States. So let's look at some of the other problems that you faced and the obstacles that you did, and you overcame them, to your credit.
Well, look, we had the Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, who thought it was unnecessary. Tillerson also thought it was, more than unnecessary. It would put the U.S. at a disadvantage diplomatically. My argument to the president was, the world is watching to see whether or not you're a politician like everybody else, making a promise before the campaign and then ignoring it afterwards, or whether you are going to have the courage of your convictions, keep your promise. And of course, if you don't keep this promise, what are you signaling? You're signaling to the world that you're afraid of who? The Palestinians, Hamas, the PA, Hezbollah. I mean, the United States should be afraid of these entities. Israel's not afraid. Why should you be afraid? And what you decide will resonate not just in the U.S.-Israel relationship, but it'll send a signal across the globe to Korea, to North Korea, to Iran, to Russia, that the United States will do what it thinks is right and won't be cowering in fear. And he immediately, grasped that as being sort of the critical issue, and that's how. And one thing I'll say also, Zev, to the credit of General Mattis, because after the president decided, Secretary Tillerson began to complain. Well, we're going to have violence in all our embassies from Morocco all the way to Pakistan. Across the entire Arab world, we're going to have violence. And Mattis, who was against the decision, he said in my presence, he said to Secretary Tillerson, he said, look, the president has made a decision. I didn't agree with it, but we have to execute on it. And I can assure you, especially after the lessons we learned from Benghazi, that the United States knows how to protect every single embassy in the world against any harm to its diplomats. And I guarantee you that not one hair will be harmed on anyone anywhere from this decision, even though I don't agree with it. And that to me was really, America's military at its finest. I mean, that, even though I didn't agree with Mattis ideologically, I thought that was such a exemplary statement of how the military is supposed to work.
Who said that you're too Jewish?
I didn't put it out in the book. I'll reveal for the first time, because most people ask me, who's the guy? It was actually a woman. I'll tell you that. I don't want to make this about anybody individually. But I was certainly told that.
In what context did it come about that you were accused of being too Jewish?
So the president was coming to Israel for the first time, and we wanted him to come to the Western Wall. It would be the first time a sitting president ever visited the Western Wall, and I was pushing for it very hard. I was also pushing for him to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the Western Wall. The State Department was pushing back, and they actually prevailed on that. Early on, they pushed back and said, you can't do that, because then that would be a statement by the United States that we accept Israeli sovereignty over the Western Wall. We don't want to do that. And I said, well, why not? I mean, you're telling me it's controversial that Israel has sovereignty over the Western Wall, and they were pushing back. So I pushed all these issues as hard as I could. We actually had a great trip. The president came to the Western Wall, and again, it was a history-making trip. But I was pushing these issues, and I got a call that said, enough. Don't be so Jewish. You represent the United States. And I said, do you think I'm under any disillusion as to who I work for? I think this is something that would be great for the United States. And by the way, why do the laws of political correctness apply everywhere except to the Jewish people? I mean, I'm not a politically correct guy, but if you're going to adopt that approach, don't you think the Jews should benefit from it?
It may sound like you're too Jewish. You're not American. You're too Jewish. It's like the old stereotypes about the Jews' dual loyalty. It's anti-Semitic in a way.
No, it definitely is anti-Semitic, and I'll tell you why. Because throughout my, there are people in the State Department, there are people that I work with who are Christian, who are every bit as committed and devoted to Israel as I am. I mean, most of them, I would say, most of them are evangelical Christians, but they're committed to Israel and they love Israel. And no one would ever say to them, don't be so Christian, or don't be so.
Don't be so Jewish.
But it just seems that the Jewish people are the only ones who get this accusation of dual loyalty. By the way, there are people who are atheists who still think that in the United States government, who still think it's best for the United States to support Israel for a whole host of reasons. U.S. support for Israel is not unique to the Jewish people or a Jewish lobby or Jewish influence. America loves Israel because America loves Israel, because it's best for America. And the Judeo-Christian values that make America great, they come from Israel.
We're speaking with former American ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. His must-read book is called Sledgehammer. When Donald Trump went to Israel, you put together a video. There was a whole scenario. You were afraid he was going to change perspective on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Tell us about what happened and what you did and the repercussions.
Well, the president had been informed by a number of people that he respected, that the Palestinians were ready to make peace, that they wanted to make peace. They were prepared to make enormous concessions, like giving up most of Jerusalem, giving up the old city, giving up a claim to repatriate refugees, and that it was Netanyahu who was digging in, refused to make peace.
Now, who told him that?
Well, I don't say that in the book either, but it was a very well-respected philanthropist in New York.
A Jewish one?
Yes. And so after that discussion, and I knew that wasn't the case. I mean, I knew, and we all knew that, the Palestinians were not prepared to make those types of concessions. And of course, even if they were willing to make some concessions, Hamas was still committed to destroying Israel. So I was concerned the president was coming to Israel with a false impression. And so discussing this with Netanyahu, I thought that the best way to relieve the president of this misapprehension as quickly as possible is to prepare a video, not out of context, nothing, no sound bites that are subject to misinterpretation, but sort of the actual statements of Abbas in Arabic that he's made that really show that he supports terrorism, he supports the compensation of terrorists, he considers the blood of terrorists to be holy, he encourages that malign behavior. And so we put together a tape. And during the meeting of the president and Netanyahu, that included Tillerson and me and Jared Kushner and some people on the Israeli side, I suggested that the Israelis play the tape for the president. And he saw the tape. He was very much agitated by it, very moved by it. He was surprised. He said, "Is this the same guy that I met in Washington last month? He seemed like such a nice guy, this Abbas." He then went to Bethlehem the next day and to meet with Abbas, and he read him the riot act. He said, "Who are you? Are you you come to me, you tell me how much you love peace, how much you love Israel, you want to make peace, and now you're telling terrorists to go out and kill Jews. Who are you?" And he really gave it to him, and that changed the perspective. Now, a month or so later, I'm back in Washington, and I was asked to see Tillerson and Mattis, and they were furious. And they said to me, "What right do you have to prepare a video? You don't tell anybody about it. It's not on the agenda. You have a formal meeting between two heads of state, and you just pull out a video and you play it without clearing it with the Secretary of State, without clearing it with the president's staff." And I said, "Look, did you know about what the president was being told and what he was thinking?" And they said, "No." I said, "Well, first of all, you should know that. It should be your job to know that. But second of all, look, I'm going to make sure the president has the right facts. I'm going to make sure he gets Israeli policy right. It's his decision, but he's going to at least have the right facts and not be operating under misapprehensions." And this, to me, was the quickest, best, most compelling way to help him understand these dynamics. And again, I'm going to keep making sure the president is well informed for as long as I have this job, and even after I lose this job, if I do. I want the president to be well informed, and I work for him. And
did they like that? Did they accept that?
Not really. I mean, they did begrudgingly, because that's actually the law. That's the way the ambassador-president relationship works. But No, they didn't like it.
Did they try to undermine you in any way with the president?
Yeah, no. The truth is that I'm sure they did. I mean, I'm 6,000 miles away, so I'm not sure everything that's being said. But the president really defended me. I mean, he didn't really want to hear it, And I think they, again, if you're the Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense, you got the whole world on your shoulders. I mean, they had so many other things that they had to deal with. I think they just concluded that when it came to the U.S. and Israel, other people were going to be involved, not them. But they still had a big world out there to keep them busy.
Aren't you supposed to go to Ramallah as well with the president?
Yeah, I was supposed to go to Ramallah.
What happened?
Abbas wouldn't let me go because he felt that, Bethlehem was not part of Israel. And if I came, it would be a signal that somehow we were acknowledging that Bethlehem was part of Israel because I'm the ambassador to Israel.
But didn't they burn an effigy of you?
That was later. Yeah. I mean, that was
later. Okay.
That was later. Yeah. Well, they after a while, they started getting a little angrier and they used to burn some replica of me in Ramallah.
What did you think when that happened? What went through your mind?
I was, it's a little, I'm not used to anybody, hating me. I hope no one ever hated me before, and I certainly wasn't aware of it. So yeah, it's a little bit off-putting to see somebody that hates you so much they're going to set something on fire that looks like you. But as I pointed out once before, the effigy was actually very thin. So at the very least, they were burning. They were making me look thin, which I do struggle with. So that's
what did Tammy say? Your wife? What did she say?
She said you look better in person.
We're speaking with former American ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. His must-read book is called Sledgehammer. One of the crowning achievements that you have is, of course, the Abrahamic Accords. Did you get opposition from the left and the right trying to put together this peace deal between Israel and UAE and other Arab countries?
So, the first step we made was we put out a proposed peace plan between Israel and the Palestinians, which Prime Minister Netanyahu supported, Defense Minister Gantz supported. We were told it's the first plan ever written that satisfies the requirements of the Israeli defense establishment. But of course, Israel being what it is, there was a lot of opposition. And what was interesting about it, I mentioned in the book that the Secretary of Energy at the time, his name is Yuval Steinitz, he came to me and he said, the far left thinks hates the plan because they think you're destroying the two-state solution. And the far right hates the plan because they think you're creating a Palestinian state. So he said, given that, you must have landed in the right place, given that. Now, look, it was a proposal, and it'll be subject, hopefully, one day to people will pull it out of the mothballs and focus on it because it really is the only plan that worked. But what that did, as it relates to the Abraham Accords, especially when Israel embraced it, it showed the Arab world that Israel really does want peace. Israel really is willing to identify the terms, the conditions, the geography under which they're willing to make peace with the Palestinians. And, while the Palestinians went to the UN and tried to, literally ripped up the plan at the Security Council, we got pretty good reviews from Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, from other
Morocco, Sudan.
We got pretty good reviews. And by the way, all of that I think is really a credit to Jared Kushner. I want to make sure it's clear. I wasn't the one, selling the plan to the Saudis or the Moroccans or the Emiratis. It was Jared, and he delivered really a diplomatic home run by convincing them. Well, he got nominated. Yeah. I hope he gets it. He deserves it.
No, he certainly does. In the few moments that we have remaining, and certainly is a major accomplishment, the Abrahamic Accords. How would you describe the relationship between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu?
So, it's gotten a lot of attention lately. There were some comments that the president made that weren't flattering about Netanyahu, primarily relating to the fact that Netanyahu congratulated President Biden in the president's eyes too graciously and too quickly. It wasn't that quick. I mean, he wasn't in the top 10, in terms of the ones and so the president reacted to that. Over the course of the 4 years, they actually had a very warm relationship. I think they saw eye to eye on a lot of things. And, even that interview the president gave where he was unflattering, he also mentioned the fact that he really likes Bibi kind of deep down. So it's a complicated relationship. The president has a lot of complicated relationships, but I think net there was a lot of mutual respect.
Now, one of the things I spoke to Tom Rose, who worked with Vice President Pence, he mentioned that in the White House, you had glad kosher food, you had Shabbos meals, you had a minyan almost every day, you had a sukkah. Let's look at that, because that doesn't get a lot of reportage on, but it seems fascinating that the Jewish life thrived in the Trump administration.
Yeah, it did. I wasn't there much for those things. I was in Israel, but yeah, there was a strong Jewish presence. We had the first ever Yom HaAtzmaut party in the White House.
It never was the Israeli Independence Day party?
What? Never.
It never was an Israeli Day. Wow.
No, they never had one before. They had a Hanukkah party, but they never had a Yom HaAtzmaut Israel Independence Day party before, which I hosted one of the years that I was in town. So look, there was a great love for Israel among. Oops, I'm sorry about that.
If it's President Donald Trump, you can get it. Speaking with former American Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. Go ahead, Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Look, there were a great number of people in the White House, not just Jewish people, but a great number of people who loved Israel, who loved the relationship, who respected the relationship and wanted to make it stronger. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Jason Greenblatt or Jared Kushner. There were really a lot of people, and from all different sides of the file. And we were a great team. I miss a lot of them. I still stay in touch with most of them, and I hope we're back together again one day.
And by the way, you did a great job, because there were forces that didn't want to see the Abrahamic Accords, didn't want to see the embassy move to Jerusalem. You had a lot of sniping going on. You mentioned some of it in your book, I'm sure. Was it worse than what you portrayed in the book, by the way? Because even to get you confirmed, it was a whole process, because people didn't want to see you in the role that you were in.
It was a process, but I had faith in the path that I was taking, and I would go through all that again in a second in order to get back into this job.
You think it's going to happen? What's your gut feeling tell you?
It's up to God. I don't know. Whatever he decides will happen.
And I'm sure the president loved your faith. Did the president mention that he noticed the distinction between Orthodox Jews and non-Orthodox Jews as far as support that he enjoyed within the Jewish community? It was almost monolithic in the Orthodox one, and the opposite in the non-Orthodox community.
Yeah, he's observed it from time to time. I think it frustrated him. He naturally assumes that all Jews should love Israel, and therefore, because he was so pro-Israel, that they would, by extension, that they would love him. And he's just very surprised that there are so many Jews that, as to whom Israel is not even a top 5 issue or a top 10 issue that they vote on, and it frustrated him. He knew from me that the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel is a core principle of our faith. I mean, if you don't think that that's going to happen, you're missing out on most of what it is to be Jewish. So he understood that, and it surprised him, and it frustrated him. It frustrated me too. But on the other hand, there were pockets of Jews, a lot Orthodox, not only Orthodox, but there were certainly pockets of Jews, pockets of Israeli Americans, especially living in Florida. We got about 42% of the Jewish community in Florida. So while we got maybe 30% of the Jews across the board, the ones that were in New York, we were going to lose New York anyway. The ones in California, we were going to lose California anyway. Florida, which is a purple state, which we had to win, we got 42% of the Jews. So there was a significant support there that we needed.
There's such partisan behavior. If people either loved Donald Trump or they hated him, were you ever the focus of the hatred that people had towards the president when you went in different places speaking or being there? Did you feel that people attack you?
I did. Yeah, I did. Many times. It was painful. I took this job with very specific goals to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship. That's all I focused on. That's what I cared about. I thought the president deserves, an A+ in that category. I thought our relationship was extremely successful. And, I would go someplace and I would start getting attacked on some other issue that I had nothing to do with, which frankly, I would come to the president's defense because I thought they were defensible positions, but I found myself immersed in all these other issues that I had really nothing to do with.
Mr. Ambassador David Friedman, I thank you for your service because you did a tremendous job. It was under stress. People try to undermine you every step of the way, but you persevered for Israel, for Judaism, for the country. And by the way, my final question as we close out is part of the Abrahamic Accord is that Israel couldn't really expand Yehuda and Shomron areas. You're a big proponent of that, but did you find the conflict with dealing with that particular issue where you had to give in on that?
Look, I saw it as a necessary compromise to get to what I agree with everyone was the better outcome at the time, and I explain why in the book. But remember, Israel wasn't forced to cancel its plans to have sovereignty over parts of Judea, Samaria, and this was a negotiated point. The obligation was to suspend. Suspend is, by definition, temporary. So where we are today, look, it's on the table. It's no longer a toxic issue. It's an issue that I think we'll get back on the table at some point. And no one in the Arab world has asked Israel to cancel or to nullify those plans. So I think we'll get to the right place in due course.
Mr. Bass, I want to thank you for your public service for what you did. May I recommend people read your new book, Sledgehammer, which is doing great and continue to do so. If they make a movie, who would you like to see portray Ambassador David Friedman in the movie of the book?
Well, I just want somebody handsome, but, George Clooney would be great. Michael Douglas, if he might be okay. He might be a little bit old, but, somebody of that ilk would be great.
And thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Zev.
Thanks for listening.
For continuous Jewish programs, talklinenetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the talklinenetwork.com.